it is the responsibility of who generates the evidence to actually tickle and arouse this political will. It doesn't come by chance, it doesn't come automatically. And one of the strategies that we find effective here is let the evaluation respond to the real information gap or the real question that the political environment wants answers for. In Parliament, almost every parliamentary session has questions where Parliament is challenging government. And that is where the questions for evaluation should be derived from. Not from our wishful, ambitious thoughts or our academic interests and so on.
There needs to be kind of a step back in terms of what do policymakers really need, like putting ourselves in their shoes. Basically, they don't, they're making decisions all the time. They're making them in real time. They're making them, it's not one decision that is being made. And so being present, being embedded, being kind of responsive to their questions kind of builds that culture of evidence that is often lacking.
For issues that are long running and are deeply embedded within the system, and for issues for which the answers are messy and are by nature very complex, you likely would get more evidence coming from within the country. For issues that have, I usually use the word surgical, just to denote how specific and targeted it would be. For targeted issues and interventions, you likely get evidence that are driven by donors.
The lack of there being as robust, before an impact evaluation, robust descriptive data and qualitative methods used to make sure that an intervention makes sense in a context, to make sure that it's as well designed as it should be, such that whatever results you get are actually somewhat meaningful. During an impact evaluation, the process monitoring data that can be really helpful to be collecting alongside the impact evaluation to make sense of mechanisms, cost data, for cost effectiveness analysis, qualitative data, again, to understand mechanisms. I think, if we don't have, funding and time or incentives to make sure we're, doing that type of work before an RCT and alongside an RCT and sometimes after the fact to make sense of certain results or help make sense of certain results, then it limits the policy usefulness of the interventions.
We try to help the ministry, in this case, develop a research agenda. The impact evaluation is one component of your overall research agenda. And what is your research agenda?
If you know that the logic behind the program works, then you don't always need to do an impact evaluation. But what you do need is you need a much more systematic monitoring system. And that monitoring system really needs to be built around your theory of change.
Especially in a crisis context, our government partners are very strapped. They're, priorities, there's multiple priorities they are trying to address at the same time. So the more that we can get to thinking about what are the specific data needs, but then also let's go through the policy planning process with you. So let's think through, once we have this data, if it shows us X, this is what the pathway to change will be. If it shows us Y or Z, these are what the potential pathways mean. So really trying to think through what's that kind of pre-policy plan rather than just a sort of pre-analysis plan from a research perspective.
The thing is that the relationship between a policymaker and people like you and me who are in the field of research and data is instrumental. Let's be very clear about it. There's no romance here. I mean, you will be as useful as you are useful. And one way to look at and to identify opportunities, which I have found extremely effective, is to actually look at political rhetoric. We dismiss that as, all sorts of noise. But in political rhetoric, I have found the seeds of where the real interest can possibly lie.